Good afternoon, folks. Chief Meteorologist Nick Lilly here with a look at your tropical update for September 24th of 2019, brought to you by Pine Belt Gutters. We've got a lot going on in the tropics per standard operating procedure. It is late September after all. That's pretty normal for this time of the year. Out into the Gulf of Mexico, we still have that little tropical wave we've been talking about for the better part of 10, 11 days, 12 days roughly. This is the one that started out just off to the south of Jamaica. It kind of rode up toward the Bahamas, and now it's sliding off to the west. It's probably going to run into Mexico before it can do anything, but the National Hurricane Center is giving it a chance of development. We'll talk more about that in a second. Into the open Atlantic we go. We got Jerry, Karen, and Lorenzo out here. We got a little mid-level low spinning around up here, and some showers and thunderstorms along an axis there. Back in behind Lorenzo, we've got another wave, and one actually just off the screen there, another wave back in behind that. So the tropics will remain active at this time of the year as we head through at least the next week and a half, at which point the MJO, which is currently over kind of the Atlantic and Africa, is going to continue to shift off to the east. If you want more info about what the MJO is, I've got that over on my blog. But that's going to continue to shift off to the east, and that should quiet things down on a widespread scale, though we'll still unfortunately have a chance for individual storms to kind of fire up. All right, so Tropical Storm Jerry, here we go, wind at 50 miles an hour. This is going to slide off to kind of the east. Now, recall yesterday they were showing at the tail end of this kind of a little hook back off to the southeast. Still showing that. However, as it does so, it's probably going to be extra tropical. Currently a tropical storm. You can see it's getting eaten apart. The center of this thing, we've got some cloud cover down here, but most of the convection is off to the east side of this thing. It's getting ripped up pretty good by some of the shear that's out there. Karen down off to the south is looking a little healthier this afternoon, crossing over Puerto Rico. Actually, right about now, it's currently 65 miles off to the south of San Juan. That was as of 1 o'clock, though, so that was about 2 hours ago. It's moving north at about 10 miles an hour, so you figure, okay, well, the center of the thing's probably still offshore. However, you're probably starting to see rain bands across parts of Puerto Rico, which, by the way, are still recovering from Maria. So there are places, a lot like here after Katrina, with tarps on the roof still. That don't necessarily have running water or electricity still in some places, which is pretty incredible given the amount of time that it's been. But they just don't have access to all the needs to fix the infrastructure down there that we do here. This one also has kind of a hook back off to the west toward the end of the cycle here. I know this may be kind of tough to see the coloring with Jerry actually back in behind it, but yeah, this is going to move up to about where Jerry is right now, and then hook itself back off to the west. We'll have to see what happens after that point. Wind currently at 45 miles an hour, gusting to 50. Over to Lorenzo we go. Every time I see this name, I think of the fullback from the Saints back in the day, Lorenzo Neal. Category 1, eventually a 2 and a 3 as this thing lifts off to kind of the west-northwest and then off to the northwest. I think it'll probably make a run at a Category 4. We'll have to see. But currently wind at 65 miles an hour, gusting to 75, 997. This one's probably not going to bother anybody unless you're on shipping routes out there or a bird. And then, yeah, a 10 to 20% chance of development for this little guy just north of Cancun, drifting across the Bay of Campeche over the next couple of days. Probably going to run out of time before it runs into, before it can do anything, it runs into parts of Mexico. Okay, back to the spaghetti plots on Jerry. And we were talking about this yesterday about how the models are spread really far apart in terms of your time. I mean, we got some of them that say, okay, right there toward Bermuda over the next couple of days. Others, whew, well off to the west-northwest, so, or the east-northeast. So, and this is going to be dictated by what the ridge of high pressure does out here and how quick it gets caught up in the flow aloft. But that is going to dictate what happens with Karen, which, yeah, through the first couple of days, through Friday, we're actually feeling pretty good about where this thing's going to be. It's going to slide north, end up just about where Jerry is right now. You can see Bermuda here on the map. But then it's going to kind of float around here and maybe curlicue back to the west, depending on what happens with Jerry, and Jerry depends on what happens with the ridge of high pressure. A lot of moving parts here. And then that same ridge that's going to dictate what Jerry does is going to eventually dictate what Karen does here. There may end up being kind of a weakness on the back side of it. Maybe it'll lift back to the north before it ever impacts anybody in the United States. Maybe it's a little bit stronger. It gets into the Gulf of Mexico. Maybe it's super strong and it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, goes all the way to Mexico. There's a chance that it gets ripped up too. There's a lot of unknowns with this thing as we head through the next couple of days. And we're going to start things off with the GFS over the next few days. Here's Jerry, there's Karen, there's Lorenzo. 700 millibar moisture, 850 vorticity. Like always, we're talking about dry areas in the grayed out to kind of brownish, dusty color. We tried to color code it, dust, dry, dry, dust. Okay, it's dry, dry. Vorticity in the lower levels, that's the warmer colors. The warmer the color, the more the vorticity, the more the vorticity, the more the low-level spin. And let's set things into motion. There goes Jerry, bye-bye. There's Karen falling apart and getting eaten up. And then there's Lorenzo. The dry air that's in here is associated with a big ridge of high pressure. High pressure, of course, nice weather. Dry in the mid-levels. Hey, this all makes sense, right? So this thing parks itself here, and then we've got Karen floating backwards and off to the west. We've got Jerry falling apart. Lorenzo, again, kind of a fish storm out here, not really bothering anybody. And then Karen kind of floats back this direction. We've got what's left of Jerry in here. And that ridge of high pressure that's off to the north may develop some sort of a little weakness out ahead of the next front that comes flying through as we head through October 3rd and 4th, just as an aside. That would put it through our neck of the woods here in South Mississippi on the 3rd or 4th of October. And that would be not necessarily a summer buster. However, we're starting to get to that time of the year where the summer buster. So let's all cross our fingers, knock on wood. Here, I'll lean off and knock on wood that that's the one that shows up sometime between the 2nd and about the 6th of October. But we'll have to wait and see if it gets that far off to the south. Okay, so that's just one model. Karen getting picked up and pulled back out to sea. That's the GFS. Let's look at the European. Here we go. Jerry, Karen, Lorenzo. Too far. That little guy right there, the 10 to 20% chance of development, that actually slides toward Mexico. We're not worried about that. Jerry gets eaten up by dry air. Here's Karen, and there's Lorenzo. There's your ridge of high pressure, settles, and shoves Karen back toward the Bahamas. Notice we had a front that slid through to the north. You saw the dry air. It continues to march that way. That dry air, backside of a cold front. That's just a change in air mass. So you can actually follow the front back this direction, kind of right in there. There's your little front right there. Ridges of high pressure, one toward the Gulf, one toward Bermuda. Now Karen sitting toward the Bahamas going, well, where's Karen going to go? By the way, Lorenzo, fish storm, not bothering anybody. Where's Karen going to go? It's going to look for the weakness between those two ridges. Is there one? If there's one, where is it? It wants to go north. It wants to find the poles. Coriolis says, find the pole. Karen says, all right, I will act on that Coriolis. It floats around for a couple of days. Here we are on the 3rd, 4th of October. It hasn't really moved in about 2 days. We saw another front pass by. High pressure is still in control just to the north and just off to the west. But there's a little bit of weakness in here, and that's where it starts to maybe drift off to the north. So a lot happening and a lot of uncertainty in terms of where Karen's going to go. You got two models, the American and the European, both suggesting that Karen finds some semblance of some kind of a weakness to move back off to the north somewhere close to the eastern United States. Right now, it could get into the Gulf of Mexico, but it's not looking likely, thank goodness. But we're going to have to kind of wait and see. We got to watch what happens with Jerry. We got to watch what happens with the ridge of high pressure behind it. That's going to dictate what Karen does. Then we have to watch the first one ridge and then a secondary ridge back in behind that to see what they do, to see what Karen does with respect to those two. Then we have to watch a cold front back in behind that to see what that does in terms of maybe picking up Karen or not penetrating far enough to the south to the point where Karen can continue to move off to the west, and maybe, again, a lot of moving parts, folks. We'll do our best to stay on top of them. You can, too, by checking out the Tropical Update every single day. Of course, as always, brought to you by the good folks at Pine Belt Gutters.